Welcome to Spy Girls, where espionage meets real talk. We are two former CIA operatives, Brittany Butler and FBI Special Agent, World of Intelligence, Crime, and Global Affairs. And today I'm so excited because we have a author, our very first author, Steve Urszenyi. He is the author of Out in the Cold. And Out in the Cold is his second installment of his Special Agent Alexandria Martel series. It comes after his first was a huge success, Perfect Shot. Steve, welcome. Thank you for coming today.
Thanks very much for having me, guys.
And something that our listeners do not know is, Steve, can you clue us in on who Alex was kind of modeled after?
Yeah, a little bit of trivia there. In large respect, Alex was modeled after our very own Tracy Walder. So years ago, I was developing Alex's character. I was writing my first Alex Martel novel, and I was working out the backstory. And as everybody knows, the backstory is kind of like the legend of an officer. And I was trying to figure out, well, who is this person? Who was she before she was who she is and doing what she's doing today? And lo and behold, I stumbled on The Unexpected Spy. And Tracy Walder jumped out and basically let me know that I could create a character who was as badass as Tracy was and do all the things that Tracy has done. So that's why Alex has the backstory she has today.
Well,
I love that.
thank you, Steve. I don't find myself worthy of that, but I really appreciate it. And I actually wanted to ask you a basic question because I get this question a lot, right? Like why CIA, why FBI? Why this genre? Like what about this genre most appealed to you? And I mean, your books are fantastic
Oh, thank you.
and really, I guess, inspired you to get into this genre of book.
I mean, the simple answer is the genre I've always liked reading.
Mm.
Ever since I was young. Well, when I was really small, I used to love sci-fi. I was a sci-fi fanatic. The old books by Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, Frank Herbert, and the Dune series. But then, sort of later in my teens and early 20s or adulthood, I discovered Tom Clancy and Robert Ludlum. And those books, the action, the excitement, the international intrigue, the spy stuff, the spy craft, the tech side of the Clancy novels, that just got me really hooked on thrillers and this type of thriller, the action espionage thriller. So essentially, when I set out to write a book, um, I didn't, I don't plot. I just sit down and start writing. And when I sat down to start writing, to begin writing, it was a thriller that was coming out. Actually, I tried unsuccessfully a few times to write detective novels, but they all sounded like the 1940s and 50s and 60s Humphrey Bogart, Maltese Falcon, black and white noir movie rather than an original voice from me, the writer. So it wasn't until I started writing a story set in Amsterdam that featured a female protagonist that it started to click and develop on its own. And that's how I fell into writing thrillers.
Okay, so Steve, I have the next question, and I am dying to know what inspired you to write the female perspective. As you know, that's been like a huge thing for me in writing my own books, is
Mhm.
wanting to change the narrative about female spies and that we are not these just sexual dominatrixes that our only value is to exchange our bodies for information, that our jobs are actually a lot more difficult than the males in some respects, especially when you're looking at environments like the Middle East where we're not seen as their equal. And
Mhm.
I feel like this was quite the task for you to jump in and get into the mind of a female. I know that as an author myself, when I switch perspectives in my book sometimes and I go over to the male perspective, I'm a little intimidated. I'm like, I hope I'm getting this right. I hope I'm
Mhm.
getting how men think and feel and everything. Were there parts of that process for you that were difficult or you felt a little daunting?
Yeah. So, again, because I don't plan what I write, I do more so now because you have to.
Yeah.
Once you have contracts, you better kind of have a direction to go. So I'm working to be more of a plotter than I have been. But in the beginning, I would just sit down and write. And literally, I started to write a dozen male characters, and the stories went nowhere. And it
Mm,
wasn't until I began to write, really was Alex's forebearer kind of character. It was an Interpol agent, female Interpol agent working in Amsterdam. And as I started to write that character, the voice just came. And
mhm,
I really enjoyed writing from her perspective and point of view. So
mhm,
um, that was kind of a no-brainer. I just kept going with a story and didn't really think about what or who I was writing. But in terms of searching for inspiration, I don't, I come from a profession as a paramedic, where
mhm,
in medicine and as a tactical medic with the police, a lot of the best paramedics I've worked with and police officers I've worked with have been women. And when
mhm.
you're on the job, either job with a partner, whatever gender that partner happens to be, you don't think of what their gender is.
Right.
Male, female doesn't matter. We're doing the same job. We're showing up on the same call. They're as skilled as I am. I'm as skilled, hopefully, as they are. We're working together to save a life, or in the case of tactical stuff, to mitigate whatever the situation is. It's just another team member.
Mhm.
And if you're focused on who they are beyond their professional role, you're doing something wrong and it's going to get you in trouble. So it was kind of a no-brainer. That plus, in all honesty, I've been married to a badass woman for 36 years now. One of the first paramedics up here in Ontario, like one of the first female paramedics. So I've
Right.
had a lot of great inspiration over the years with partners I've worked with and my own wife, and it was sort of a no-brainer. But to answer the second part of that question, getting in trouble, yeah, I would get in trouble. I would catch, Alex would push her hair back too much. I don't have that problem, obviously, but she'd brush it back over her ears, or she'd check herself in a mirror, or whatever it was. But again, when it was time to read my books, Lynn would very quickly catch me out and say, "No, Alex wouldn't do that." So I had
Oh,
my first editor here took care of any of the cliches that might have stumbled into my work.
I love that. I love that you did that. I think that's actually really smart, smart to do that. I something that Tracy and I talk a lot about, and I definitely want to get Tracy's perspective on this, is it for females in this industry, it is unique. And I love the way you looked at paramedics that like you were just doing the job together. You were just I wish honestly that more males in our industry did operated that way. But I felt, I don't know if you'll agree with me or not, Tracy, but I felt like I was treated really differently because I was a female in that line of work, that I had to work twice as hard, that I was constantly underestimated, constantly questioned. What the heck was I doing there? And yeah, Tracy, what do you think? Is that something that you kind of struggled with? And do we think that that's important to highlight in these spy thrillers? That it is different, it is unique. If you want to be realistic in the writing of these characters, I feel like I wish it was the way you're talking about, Steve, but I have found that my own experience, it wasn't that way.
For me, I think, and for those of you that read my book, it's very obvious. I did not struggle at the CIA with that. But again, I had truly the best boss I've ever had in my entire life. And I think I can't say his name, but he was remarkable. And everyone agreed that he was remarkable in terms
Mm,
of how he treated us. So I got lucky, I guess,
yeah,
in that aspect.
yeah.
But the FBI was absolutely horrendous, right, in
Mhm.
terms of how they treated me. And so part of me does wonder if it's intelligence versus law enforcement, right? Like from my
Mm,
perspective, I don't know. We all have different lived experiences, right? So that's why I would never want to diminish any woman that, right, struggled,
right,
at the CIA or didn't struggle at the FBI, because I'm sure there's
right.
both. But I
Yeah.
struggled in writing my book. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, Steve, that your wife was a proofreader, I guess, for you, because my
Mhm.
book, my publisher would not publish it without it going to focus groups of men only. Only.
Oh,
Wow.
They because my book read so female narratively, right? That's how my book read. And it was very different than biographies of other spies, right? That had, come through. It read very, very different. And so they would only actually test it with male audiences. And they really wanted me to talk about my dating life when I was at the agency. And I actually refused to do that because I was worried if I did as a female, that's what people would remember, right? And so it's interesting. I wonder, how much of that plays into, the character development if you struggle with that at all.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that because when I read your book, I mean, I certainly get the sense you talk about your experience and your struggles and the types of personalities and bosses you had, but I didn't find that a negative. I mean, in terms of a reading experience, because
Yeah,
you're reading someone's experience on the
yeah.
job.
That's all you can
And
do.
yeah, so that's why I'm reading the book. I want to get someone else's perspective. I don't want a whitewashed perspective presented to me the way the publisher wants it seen. I want the way Tracy experienced it, which is maybe it's cleaned up a little bit because the publisher thought you had to do some stuff, but I thought it was a great read. But and I shouldn't, I don't want to be dismissive of the experiences of women in my profession as a paramedic because I know when my wife was one of the first ones back in the 80s, it wasn't easy for her. There were a lot of it was very much an old boy shop back then. And she wasn't necessarily treated very well on the road by colleagues. So the experiences weren't always the same, but certainly over the last 3 or 4 decades, things have improved to the point where I can say I would hope, certainly from my perspective, things are much more on an equal footing than they were. And again, if I go into the policing community, I was a tactical officer or a tactical medic with the Ontario Provincial Police. And um, the experience there by and large was if there was a woman on the job, it wasn't a woman on the job, it was just another police officer. And one of my biggest inspirations from the Toronto Police Service is a woman I used to do calls with all the time. She was a sergeant when I met her. She was one of the first tactical police officers in Canada, one of the first female tactical officers, that is, one of the first female canine, first female mounted officers. So here's a groundbreaking woman who happened to be a great inspiration of mine. And every guy, when she was a sergeant leading a platoon, every guy in her platoon thought she was the best boss they had ever had. So there are so many examples of great women in leadership roles that it's almost too bad. It's a shame we're actually distinguishing and separating things out like she's a great woman boss or he's a great man boss. How about they're just a good boss?
yeah.
It'd be nice if we got past the demographics that we always break things down to
Yeah.
in the world of that we operate in. Yeah. So I mean, that's idealistic, but
No, I love that. And that's why we're friends, Steve. I like the way we're like-minded in that way.
exactly.
Okay. So getting back to the book.
Yes.
So something I've noticed about spy novels that I read and something that's incorporated in my writing as well is just these moral and ethical questions that are so much a part of spy thrillers, because I feel like in order to get a really genuine look at what it's like to be a spy, you almost have to address those. What are some of the moral, ethical questions that you felt like you really wanted Alex to address in your books?
Alex's backstory is, she was a combat medic and then she fell into the role. We won't give too much away, but she fell into the role of being a sniper. And she practically literally fell into that role. It wasn't something she had picked to do, but it was something she had to do and then became very good at it. So it was kind of easy giving her a moral and ethical dilemma because it's take a life or don't take a life. Yeah. She's looking through the scope of a rifle and she has a decision to make, pull the trigger or not. And for Alex, in Perfect Shot and as well in the second book, it comes down to she enjoys her role, not because she enjoys killing, but she enjoys being the person who settles the score, not settles the score, but makes things right. She likes being the bringer of justice.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mhm.
there's anybody who gets into a position like that, I imagine that they're walking a bit of a gray tightrope.
Mhm.
And because it's a big decision, what if something, and sometimes the rules of engagement, obviously in combat, dictate when you can and can't finish the job that you're assigned to do. There are things that, conditions that have to be met for you to actually be able to squeeze that trigger. And I like to put Alex on the gray line, on the, in the judgment zone line of whether she should finish a job or not. And if you read Perfect Shot, there's really a key scene there where she has a decision to make about what she's going to do. And I won't say which way it goes, but it's fun to put people into positions where they're tested to their limits, whether that's their physical extremes, emotional extremes, or in this case, their moral and ethical extremes. And I think that's where people get to know themselves best. And I think the reader gets their most enjoyment going, what would I do? Maybe they're not thinking it out loud, but they certainly have an opinion as they're following that paragraph or section in a story about what would I do if I were Alex or if I were Caleb in that situation. And, whether they agree or not with the outcome is part of what makes the writing experience and the reading experience so fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that's what humanizes your characters. I mean, I think that's kind of the genre. I I think it's moving, and I would love to get your opinion about this. What's happening with the genre? Where do you see it going? But I think more and more authors are highlighting what makes these characters human, like that they're not just like the James Bond or Jason Bourne that's just like doing stuff. It's
Right.
like they're actually grappling with these decisions. They have some kind of dilemma that they're up against, and obviously it just makes the story more interesting, I think, and that
Yeah, and
really getting in their mind.
I think, if I analyze it a little more deeply, Alex is kind of a microcosm of the entire intelligence community. As as a non-intelligence person,
Hmm.
hopefully an intelligent person, but not in intelligence,
Hmm.
you know, yes, we want transparency from our agencies, our government, our intelligence operatives, but we shouldn't, in my opinion, we shouldn't know everything. We don't want to know everything. We can't know everything. Because I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here telling you if the public knew everything about what's going on, first of all, they'd have no context from which or with which to process that information. So they can't make a decision. Sure, they'd have an opinion. Everybody's got an opinion, but they wouldn't have a properly informed opinion. They wouldn't know what to ask for.
Yeah.
So you have to have, Alex as that person who weighs the grays who acts in the gray zones and tries to weigh the good and the bad.
Hmm.
That's really, in essence, what the intelligence community does on the whole is takes in information, assesses, processes that information, analyzes it, and determines what actions, if any, should come from that information, what's actionable, what's not. So I think Alex very much, hopefully, reflects in some way the intelligence community at large. And that's why it's fun to write. And I hope people get that gray zone applies, yes, to Alex, but also to the community at large.
Yeah. I mean, I think, Tracy, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I feel like this is, it almost bleeds into larger questions, especially here in the United States, about what the public should know and what they shouldn't, and getting just little snippets of information. We have quite a few leaks going on
Mhm.
recently, and they're from our very top officials. And if for me, at least, as a former intelligence officer, it's mind-boggling that this type of information is readily available to the average citizen.
Mhm.
And the some of the, I guess, arguments against it is, well, why shouldn't the American people know everything? Why shouldn't all that information be made public? And I think it's to your point about not getting the full picture. It can be really dangerous to just get these little snippets of information and not have the full picture. Um, yeah, Tracy, what do you?
Yeah.
Like, I think to piggyback off of that, my question would be part of the problem, right, that we see here, and I'm sure you see it too, regarding the public's wanting to know everything, right,
Mhm.
does come from literature, pop culture, social media platforms, all of those things. And part of what I love, honestly, about your work is I feel that you are responsible in how you present the information, how you develop the characters, all of those things. To what extent do you feel that authors, artists, creative folks in this industry have, to present? The reality is we don't actually want to present the most accurate picture because it's boring sometimes, to
Mm.
be totally honest with you. So to what extent, do we have a responsibility, right? To couch this information in a way that is responsible and ethical.
I mean, it's entertainment in the end,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's literature. I mean, if we want to use a lofty term, it's literature, but in the end, it's entertainment. And you want to make the entertainment side of things, you want to make the story believable so that, I use the term truth adjacent. I always want to write
I love that.
close to truth, but with enough make believe in there that it's exciting because
Right.
again, the truth is can be really boring. It's 150 hours of absolute boredom and 5 seconds of absolute adrenaline busting excitement. So there is there's always a responsibility to tell true stories or stories that could be true. Um, but the role of the writer isn't to whitewash anything. So, I mean, you get all kinds of nefarious. I mean, my stories, the agencies aren't always the good guys, or the people who are supposed to be the good guys aren't always the good guys. So, the responsibility of the writer is to tell a story that's truthful and keep things balanced. And balanced is good because it's entertaining, but it's also, and I don't mean balanced as in the news today, where there has to be two sides of every story, even if one side represents 1,000th of 1% of the population. I mean balanced as in if something is too heavy handed, people aren't going to appreciate or enjoy the story. And if something is too fluffy and whitewashed and nice and angelic, same thing. You've got to have a balance of the angels and the demons in any story. That's what makes any book, whether it's the Bible or fiction, fun to read, is that they're always positive forces and negative forces at work, and hopefully they balance each other out at some point. So I think the response to answer your question, really, the responsibility of the writer is to do as good a job as they can at reflecting the truth of the story they're telling and make it enjoyable for the reader. But that's probably where it ends, in terms of the responsibility of the writer at that point.
I
I
love
hope.
that. I
Yeah.
totally agree with you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I have kind of a light question. Been talking kind of heavy. I love it. I love
That's
these
good.
deeper questions. If Out in the Cold or The Perfect Shot was adapted to the big screen, who would play Alex?
Good
Oh, that's a
question. Love that.
yeah. It's funny. I have an IMDb. I'm on IMDb, and I keep a list there. And every once in a while, I'll throw another character into the list who I think might be able to play Alex. So, Alex started. I started writing the Alex Martell character back in 2014. That's when the roots of the story started. So, things have changed over that time. But I would say one woman who comes to mind right away was Emily Blunt.
Oh yeah, I
When
can.
she played
Yeah,
the opposite Tom Cruise in
yeah,
the Tomorrow War, I think it was.
yeah, yeah,
She was such a badass, kick-ass character.
yeah.
I love that
She was.
character.
She was.
Yeah. But there's other women. I'm trying to remember who else is Vikander, the woman with the last name Vikander, and I can't remember her first name right now.
Alicia Vikander. Yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
I love
I
her.
think she's
Yeah.
Danish or Swedish. I can't remember.
Yeah,
But
she's
yeah.
Dana. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, even, I mean, Zoe Saldana was on the list for a while. So,
Yeah.
it comes and goes. I honestly don't know. If anybody wants to make it, they can cast whoever they like,
No,
as far
right?
as I'm concerned.
I know. I feel the same way, Steve. And
Yeah,
anybody comes to me and is like, I want to make this movie, I'd
Do
be
what
like,
you want.
do
Enjoy
whatever
it.
you want. Have
exactly.
fun. Oh my gosh.
And that's the thing too, when it comes to making a movie or adapting a story to a movie, a novel to a movie, it's a different medium.
Hmm.
A book is one thing. It's a two-dimensional medium, but when it's adapted to a movie, it really is an adaptation. It's not a transcription of the book to the script.
Right.
It's a translation, an adaptation to a new medium.
Hmm.
And whoever's telling the story in that format, I'm not a movie maker. So, I probably have my vision in terms of things I want to see and things I don't want to see, but
Hmm.
ultimately, I'd be happy if someone wants to make the movie, just do something faithful to the story and go for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Please go for it.
Yeah, I know, right? Okay, so I don't know, Tracy, do you have any more questions for Steve? I have one more.
I don't, it might be the same question you have. It's just, I want to know what his plans are for.
Yes, yes, I totally want to know his plans, but I do also have one question for our aspiring thriller writers that might be listening in. Steve, what is one piece of advice you have for people looking to get into this genre? And I'm actually going to be taking notes myself because I look up to you as an author. So it's for personal reasons too. What piece of advice do you have to those authors like aspiring to get into the spy thriller genre?
I mean, it depends on where they are in their journey. If there are people sitting back watching this thinking, I'd love to write a book,
Yeah,
then my biggest advice is just write the book or just write anything. Just start writing.
right. Yeah.
I've been, I don't want to, I don't want to scare anybody away from writing, but it can be a long journey. I've been writing all my life, little things, snippets of things, short stories, poetry when I was a teenager. I did a magazine column for a number of years for a national paramedic magazine. All those things kept building my interest, but ultimately I got to a point where I really wanted to write. And a screenwriter I met when I was talking to a room full of screenwriters for a TV show that was going on, I kind of mentioned that I wanted to write, and they just kind of looked at me and said, Steve, if you want to write, just write. So ultimately, that's the best advice is nothing happens. Your writing can't get good until you start putting something on the page. And ideas don't flow. People ask me about the muse. How do you get your ideas for the story? Actually, I got that question 2 days ago in Staples when I was buying some office supplies. And the guy said, how do you get your ideas for your story? As if there was some muse that just comes by and drops some like fairy dust into your brain. And it's literally the advice for writers is again, just write, sit down and no ideas come from a blank page. The
Hmm.
ideas come as you start to put the words onto the page.
Hmm.
And as those words start to come, it's amazing. As a pantser, that's how my stories have started and ended. Just literally me sitting down, forcing myself to sit down and just write and get
Hmm.
the words on the page. And as that happens, the ideas start to flow and you think more about those ideas, you develop those ideas, and then the story can take off. But anyway, long-winded version of the answer is just right.
Yes. I couldn't agree with that more. And it's funny you say that because I was really struggling with the end of my book. I know a lot of people struggle with the end of their books. And even though I have like the plot all mapped out and everything, but I just was not happy with the ending last night. And I was just like sitting there and I was still writing. It wasn't until 10:30 at night that I was like, oh, this is how I make this better. Like you just have to keep going,
Yep.
keep writing.
Keep going. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a combination, and there's a lot of conferences out there. I think a key for any writer is to get to know other writers.
Hmm.
So whether that's to tie into a writers group or
Hmm.
whether that's to go to a conference and meet fellow writers or fellow aspiring writers. I mean, if you're writing, you're a writer. Simple as that.
Yeah.
So if you're a writer, meet other writers. And that it does two things. One, it lets you know there are other people on the same journey and the same path that you're on, first of
Hmm.
all.
Hmm.
But secondly, it gives you a network of people that you can call or text or do whatever you're doing when you're having a good day and celebrate your triumphs, or a bad day when you feel like quitting because you've got two kids and a mortgage and no time to write, you think, until you make the time. So it's a combination of building your own cheerleading squad, but also learning your craft by seeing how other people do things, by attending conferences and trying to absorb the wisdom of others who tread the path before you did.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. Okay, so future plans for Alex.
So Out in the Cold, as you know, is out now, came out in November. And the next book to come down the pike is the third in the series. So Blood Oath is the third book in the Alex Martell series. That comes out on November 18th. And the short version is Alex is on safari with her dad, and we meet her dad in Out in the Cold very briefly. But Alex and her dad are on safari in Tanzania, and something happens, and eventually her dad gets kidnapped, and Alex has to assemble a force to go find him in Africa. And I won't give away much more right now. It's certainly you can actually pre-order it online, and there's more blurbs about it online. But the basic story is it's an African adventure for Alex, Caleb, and her dad.
Awesome.
Where can
Okay,
we
so you guys
pre-order?
heard that. Blood Oath on pre-order now. Amazon, I assume.
Amazon?
Amazon everywhere. Yeah, anywhere.
Great.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Steve, for tuning in. That's all I have. This has been such a great
This is
just chat with
awesome.
me as a fellow writer and author. And yeah, thank you so much, Steve. We wish you nothing but the ultimate success with your next book launch. And please do let us know so we can have you back on to chat more about Alex's next adventure.
And thanks for having me on this inaugural Authors, the Spygirls podcast.
Yay.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.